By the middle of the 17th century, London believed it had survived everything. Plague had come and gone. War had shaken the crown. Kings had lost their heads. Still, the city stood. It always did. If you walked its streets then, you would feel the confidence immediately. London was crowded, but it moved with purpose. Ships lined the Thames so tightly their masts looked like a forest of bare trees. Cargo came in every hour. Sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco from Virginia, spices from the East, cloth from English looms. Wealth passed hand to hand, crate to crate, without pause. More than 400,000 people lived here. That number alone tells you how important the city had become. This was not just a capital. It was the engine of the country. If England breathed, London was the lung. The streets were narrow, not by accident, but by habit. The city had grown for centuries, inside old Roman and medieval boundaries. There was nowhere left to spread, so it climbed upward. Houses leaned forward as they rose. Upper floors stretched out over the street. In some lanes, you could touch both sides at once. Sunlight rarely reached the ground. Smoke did. Most buildings were made of wood, thick oak frames filled with wattle and plaster. Roofs covered in pitch or thatch. It was cheap. It was familiar. It had worked for generations. Fire was everywhere, and no one thought twice about it. Every home had a hearth. Every shop burned candles. Bakers worked through the night. Brewers kept fires lit for days. Smoke drifted through windows and chimneys and settled over the city like a second sky. London smelled of ash even when nothing was wrong. Life pressed close. Children ran between carts. Merchants shouted prices. Church bells marked the hours, the days, the seasons. The sound never stopped. Silence belonged to the countryside. Not here. Waste flowed through open gutters. Rats lived under floorboards and in cellars. People noticed, but they accepted it. This was the price of living. Where opportunity lived, religion anchored the rhythm of the city. Church towers rose above the rooftops, solid and permanent, stone among timber. They had survived fires before. They would survive again. And that was the key belief. London had burned many times in its history. Small fires, ugly fires, fires that destroyed a street or a block, but never the whole. Buckets came out, neighbors formed lines, pumps worked, flames died. Fire was dangerous, but it was understood. It was familiar. People trusted that balance, wood and flame, risk and routine. They trusted that what had always worked would keep working. From the river to the markets, from the churches to the taverns, felt permanent. Busy, alive. No one looked at the packed rooftops and thought of collapse. No one looked at the dry beams and smelled danger. The city stood at its peak, confident in its own design, unaware that everything it relied on was already waiting to turn against it. By the summer of 1666, the city was already out of balance. It had not rained for weeks. Day after day passed under the same dry sky. Wood lost what little moisture it held. Roofs hardened. Beams shrank and cracked. Whole neighborhoods quietly turned brittle. The Thames ran lower than usual. The river still carried ships, but its strength was weaker. Water wheels slowed. Pumps struggled. No one measured pressure the way we do now. People only knew when water failed to come fast enough. Firefighting in London was simple and fragile. Buckets passed hand to hand. Leather pumps wheezed and leaked. Hooks were used to pull down burning houses. Before flames spread, everything depended on speed, cooperation, and calm. Those things were never guaranteed. There was no citywide fire service. Each parish handled its own emergencies. Authority stopped at invisible borders. Orders required confidence, and confidence required time. Fire did not wait for either. Still, the city felt safe. Summer fires were common. Small accidents happened every week. A tipped candle, a careless hearth. They flared, they burned, and they died. London trusted that pattern. On the night of September 1st, nothing felt different. Shops closed. Taverns emptied. Families slept packed together under low ceilings. Bakers worked as they always did, feeding ovens through the dark hours so bread would be ready by morning. On Pudding Lane, One of those ovens was not fully extinguished. The spark itself was ordinary. That is what made it dangerous. No alarm rang, no panic followed. A small fire in a bakery was the kind of problem London believed it knew how to solve. At first, it behaved exactly as expected. Flames crept along wood, smoke filled a room. Someone noticed. Someone shouted. Then the wind rose. It came from the east, steady and dry. It pushed air into the fire and pulled embers out. Sparks lifted, glowing briefly, then vanished into the dark. They did not fall straight down. They traveled. The city's design now worked against it. Houses leaned close, roofs almost touched. Upper floors formed a continuous path above the streets. Fire no longer needed to crawl. It could jump. Buckets were filled. Lines formed. Pumps were dragged into place. But water moved slowly, and fire began to move fast. The flames were no longer confined to one building. They reached outward, upward, and ahead. By the time people understood that this fire was different, it had already learned how to feed itself. London had built a world that could burn. And that night, the conditions were finally right. The fire did not spread like people expected. It leapt. Flames climbed the outside of houses and reached the upper floors first. Attics caught before kitchens. Stairs filled with smoke. Before anyone understood what was happening, escape routes disappeared in minutes. The wind pushed the fire faster than a person could run. Burning fragments lifted into the air and landed far ahead of the main blaze. A roof would ignite with no warning. A house would catch fire without being touched. People woke choking. Smoke forced its way through shutters and cracks. Families ran into the street half-dressed, carrying children, shouting names that vanished in the noise. Some tried to save what they could. Chests were dragged out. Beds followed. Tables scraped along cobblestones, streets clogged with furniture, carts, and bodies moving in opposite directions. The fire made its own sound, a low roar that never stopped. Wood snapped, beams gave way, windows burst outward from heat, sparks swarmed through the air like insects. Church bells rang as alarms until ropes burned through and bells fell silent. Stone walls held longer than timber, but even they began to fail. Heat cracked masonry, lead roofs melted, and poured down into the streets in bright streams that burned anything they touched. The fire reached the warehouses near the river. These buildings held oil, alcohol, and tar. When they caught, the city shook. Explosions rolled across the Thames. Flames shot skyward and reflected off the water, turning the river into a moving sheet of orange light. Night did not bring darkness. It brought brightness. The sky glowed so strongly that people miles away thought the sun was rising. Smoke climbed high, then folded back on itself, raining embers onto neighborhoods that still believed they were safe. Crowds surged toward the river. Boats were overloaded and pushed off anyway. Some tipped, some never came back. The water filled with debris, ash, and people trying to escape a fire that did not slow. Attempts to fight it collapsed. Buckets emptied faster than they could be filled, broke. Hooks arrived too late. The fire moved around every effort and through every gap. By the second day, there was no longer a front line. The fire surrounded people from multiple directions at once. London was no longer burning in pieces. It was burning as a whole. By the third day, the fire was no longer the only thing collapsing. Order went with it. At first, people still waited for instructions. They looked for parish officials, for constables, for someone who could tell them what to do. But the streets had no center anymore. Messages did not travel faster than the flames. Authority dissolved block by block. Fear filled the space it left. People stopped trusting their neighbors. A stranger running past was no longer just a stranger. He was a threat, someone who might steal, someone who might have started the fire. Rumors spread faster than facts ever had. Whispers moved through crowds and turned into certainty. By the time they reached the next street, foreigners were blamed. Dutch merchants, French workers, anyone who spoke differently or prayed differently became suspect. Men were dragged from doorways and beaten. Some were killed where they stood. No evidence was needed. The fire itself was proof enough that someone must be responsible. The city's faith cracked. Many believed the fire was punishment, a judgment sent by God for pride, for sin, for surviving plague and war, only to grow richer and louder. Churches filled briefly, then emptied again as flames reached them too. When steeples burned, belief had nowhere left to stand. Panic changed how people treated each other. Parents lost children in the smoke and never found them again. Families were split by crowds that would not stop moving. People shouted names until their voices failed, then kept running anyway. Possessions became both lifelines and burdens. A chest of goods could mean survival later, or death now, if it slowed you down. Some abandoned everything. Others refused, even as flames closed in. Carts overturned. Goods spilled into the street. Strangers fought over what moments earlier had belonged to someone else. The fire did not just destroy homes. It erased routines. Markets vanished. Taverns burned. Work stopped entirely. Without work, without shelter, without news. People existed only from moment to moment, watching the wind and listening for the roar. The sound never left. It followed them into open fields outside the city, where tens of thousands gathered, with whatever they had managed to carry. Families slept under the sky. Merchants lay beside crates of salvaged goods. The poor lay beside nothing at all. From those fields, they watched London burn. Inside the city, hesitation at the top had already done its damage. Early on, orders to pull down houses had been delayed. Property rights mattered. No one wanted to be blamed for destroying what the fire might spare. By the time that thinking changed, fire breaks were useless. The flames leapt across them, as if they were suggestions. Soldiers were finally used. Gunpowder blasted buildings apart. Walls fell. Streets were ripped open in desperate attempts to starve the fire. Some explosions worked. Many did not. Burning debris scattered into new areas, starting new blazes. The city fought itself while the fire fed. Even the presence of the king could not restore control. He moved through crowds, visible, speaking calmly, ordering action. It helped in moments. It did not change the scale of what was happening. Power relies on systems, and every system was already gone. London ceased to function as a city. It became a mass of individuals, reacting to the same threat, with no shared direction. What broke most deeply was trust. Trust that neighbors would help. Trust that leaders would decide. Trust that the rules of daily life still applied. They did not. For 4 days, fear ruled every decision. Who to stand near, what to carry, when to run, when to stop. The fire killed more than buildings. It killed the idea that London was stable, protected, and understood. By the time the flames began to slow, the people who watched them no longer believed in the city they had lived in. They had seen how quickly it could turn on them, and they knew it would never feel the same again. When the fire finally slowed, it did not end with relief. It ended with silence. The wind eased. The flames lost their strength. What remained smoldered instead of roared. For the first time in days, the sound that had filled every moment began to fade. People walked back toward the city, carefully, as if approaching something dangerous that might still strike. London was gone. Entire streets had vanished so completely that survivors could not tell where they once stood. Familiar turns led nowhere. Landmarks that had guided people since childhood were reduced to low walls and blackened stone. The ground was warm underfoot. Ash rose with every step. Churches stood hollow. Their walls remained, but everything inside was destroyed. Roofs were gone. Bells lay cracked in rubble. What had once anchored daily life now felt empty and exposed. Homes were harder to find than to lose. 13,000 houses were destroyed. For most people, there was no ruin to return to, only a place where something used to be. The scale was hard to understand at first. People searched for doorways that no longer existed. They argued over boundaries. Neighbors disagreed about where one house ended and another began. The city's memory was stronger than its remains. Smoke drifted constantly. even after the flames were out. It settled over the ruins and dulled the sun. The smell stayed in clothes, in hair, in breath. It would linger for months. Official records spoke of few deaths. The numbers were small on paper. The reality was harder to count. Many of the poor were never recorded. Many bodies were never found. What everyone could see, without any numbers at all, was loss. Tens of thousands were homeless. Winter was coming. There were no shops left to reopen. No markets to supply food in the old way. Warehouses that held grain and goods were gone. Trade stopped overnight. Money meant little without somewhere to spend it, or something to buy. Survivors adapted, because they had no choice. Tents rose in fields outside the city. Wooden shelters were built quickly from salvaged beams. People slept crowded together again. Not in houses this time, but under open sky, narrowed. Each day focused on basics. Food, shelter, finding family, protecting what little remained. The future did not stretch far ahead. It stopped at the next meal, the next night. Yet even in that emptiness, movement returned. Merchants took stock of what they had saved. Builders measured streets with their eyes. Officials walked the ruins and talked about what could be done differently. The city was broken, but it was not dead. Some things were gone forever. Medieval London, with its tight lanes and leaning houses, would not return. The habits that had shaped daily life for centuries had burned with it. People felt that absence deeply, not just as loss of property, but as loss of familiarity. The city no longer matched their memory of it. Still, people stayed. They stayed because London was more than wood and stone. It was where work was, where opportunity had always been, where rebuilding meant survival. Out of the ash and quiet, the city waited, not to be restored, but to be remade. And everyone who stood in those ruins understood one thing clearly. Whatever rose next would not be the same London they had lost. Rebuilding did not wait for morning to finish. It started while the ruins were still warm. London could not remain a field of ash. Too many people depended on it. Too much money moved through it. Too much power rested there. The question was not whether it would return, but what shape it would take. The fire had stripped the city down to decisions. Wood was the first to go. It had fed the flames too well. New rules banned timber walls in the heart of the city. Brick and stone replaced oak and plaster. Buildings rose heavier, slower, and harder to ignite. Streets changed next. The old lanes had trapped heat and panic. They had made escape impossible, and fire unstoppable. New plans called for wider roads and clearer roads. Some of the medieval maze was erased on purpose. Not by accident this time. For the first time, London tried to control how it grew. Building codes appeared. They dictated height, materials, spacing. They were enforced unevenly at first, but the idea itself mattered. The city accepted that private choices could no longer endanger everyone else. Fire was no longer treated as a familiar risk. It became a threat that required preparation. Insurance followed. People began paying to protect themselves against future loss. Fire marks appeared on buildings, showing which company would respond if flames returned. From those systems came organized fire brigades, no longer just neighbors with buckets. The disaster forced London to think ahead. Markets were rebuilt. Trade resumed. Warehouses returned to the river, redesigned and spread out. Money flowed again, cautiously at first, then with confidence. The city reclaimed its role as England's center, because there was nowhere else that could replace it. What changed most was mindset. Before the fire, London trusted habit. After the fire, it trusted planning. The city accepted that growth without limits carried consequences. Density required rules. Prosperity required restraint. The Great Fire did not just remove buildings. It removed illusions. It showed that survival depended on systems, not luck. On cooperation, not assumption. On foresight, not tradition. The London that rose was not safer by accident. It was safer by design. Stone replaced wood. Regulation replaced custom. Preparation replaced confidence. The fire had destroyed medieval London completely. In doing so, it cleared the ground for something new. A city that still burned with ambition, but now understood how close that fire could come to consuming everything. From loss came structure. From chaos came control. London rebuilt itself with the memory of flame embedded in its walls, its streets, and its laws. And that memory would shape the city for centuries to come. When the smoke finally cleared, London did not mark an ending, it marked a warning. The fire did not arrive as an enemy from outside. It rose from the center of daily life. From ovens, from hearths, from routines people trusted without thinking. It came from the same systems that had made the city thrive. That is what made it unsettling. Nothing foreign had invaded, nothing rare had failed. Ordinary life had simply pushed itself too far. London learned that a city can collapse without an army at its gates. That order can vanish without a single law being repealed. All it takes is pressure, neglect, and the belief that yesterday's solutions will always be enough. After the fire, people spoke differently about safety, about growth, about responsibility. They understood, even if they did not say it clearly, that progress carries weight, that density multiplies risk, that success demands structure. The ruins forced that understanding into view. What burned in 1666 was not just a city of wood and stone. It was an idea, the idea that things would keep working simply because they always had. London rebuilt. It grew richer, larger, more powerful than before, but it never fully forgot the lesson written into its streets. Every regulation, every fire code, every widened road carried memory inside it. Cities today are larger than 17th century London could ever imagine, more crowded, more complex, more dependent on systems that must not fail. The Great Fire does not belong only to the past. It belongs to any place that believes it is too big, too important, too established to fall apart. London survived because it changed. That is the quiet truth left behind in the ash. When the sky fell on London, it did not end the city. It taught it how close collapse always is, and how carefully it must be held back. I want you to sit with this moment for a second. A city reduced to quiet, not peace, just absence. London did not rebuild because it was brave. It rebuilt because it had no alternative. Survival demanded change, whether people liked it or not. That is why this story lasts. Disasters do not announce themselves as turning points. They arrive as inconveniences, as normal problems, as things people believe they already understand. The Great Fire was not caused by ignorance. It was caused by confidence. Confidence that systems would hold, that risk was manageable, that tomorrow would look like yesterday. Every city carries that same belief. You live inside structures you trust, systems you assume will work, routines that feel permanent because they repeat. London shows how quickly that feeling can vanish. Not through invasion, not through collapse from above, but through ordinary life, pushed just a little too far. That is the lesson left behind in the ash, and it is never as distant as it feels.